Hello, and welcome to a look at Airborne Ranger for the Commodore 64, a game that was designed, developed, and released by Microprose. Now, before getting further into the game, allow me to quote the designer's notes, or at least parts of them. One day in early 1987, Wild Bill Seeley, president of Microprose, came into a product development meeting and said, "Let's do a fast action, easy to learn combat game called Airborne Ranger, in which one soldier is pitted against lots of enemies." "An arcade video game?" we screeched. "Bleh. No, not an arcade game, but a combat action simulation. Yes, that's it," he said, pounding the table. That always gets our attention. In short order, he had convinced us we could do it. We could create an intelligent, fun, suspenseful arcade-style, fast action game that would appeal to fans of our usual intense simulations and to devotees of you-know-what type games. The scenario of this game is that you are a ranger who is being deployed behind enemy lines in order to complete one of 12 different missions. There are three themed zones: an Arctic zone, a desert zone, and a temperate zone. And the different zones has different effects on your character, man, thing. I think it's called the Ranger. In the desert, you can't sprint as far without being fatigued. And in the Arctic areas, footsteps and gunshots may be muffled a bit because of the constantly howling wind. The temperate zones are completely neutral in that regard. As the game starts, you can assign a practice ranger or a veteran ranger, and the main differences between the two is that as a practice ranger, of course, you're not endangering any character that you have created, and can use that mode to get a feel for the different missions and how the enemies behave and that kind of stuff. Assigning a veteran ranger will require a separate floppy disk to save the roster on, but once you assign a veteran ranger, you can do any of the 12 missions that you desire. Or you can do the campaign, which will take the 12 different missions and shuffle them around in completely random order. And then you have to go through them in whatever order the game's shuffling has decided. If you play single missions, you can define a difficulty that you want to try and tackle. And you can also do that if you start a campaign game, but once you have defined the difficulty level of the campaign, it is locked. You cannot change it at a later time. And while it may be, for the optimistic player, encouraging to try some of the higher difficulty levels, I can personally guarantee you that playing at a lower difficulty is not particularly shameful, because the game's difficulty tends to spike at higher difficulty levels quite incredibly, but I will get back to that. Once you start a mission, you get your objective, and the different missions can have various different variables that you have to be mindful of, or variables I think they're called. My bad, sorry. But anyway, you have to be mindful of that certain missions are stealth-y-like missions, and other missions are just run around, bang, bang, shoot anything that moves, and if it doesn't move, shoot it anyway, kind of style missions. And then you are given control of an osprey, which will have 3 supply packs it can drop, or you can drop. And you have to be incredibly mindful of where you drop them, because of course you want to make sure to space out your supplies so that you can get them when you need them. But an airborne ranger is not a superhuman. Well, he may be, but not as much of a superhuman that he is capable of carrying his standard loadout plus 3 supply packs of extra ammunition, grenades, law rockets, and that kind of stuff. So spacing the supply pods out, or packs, I should say, is a very good idea. Of course, you have to be incredibly mindful of where you drop them, because if they land in a minefield or on by barbed wire, on an enemy installation of whatever kind, that supply pod pack thing is lost. So anyway, once you have done that, then when the osprey hits the southern border of the map, you will get a beep 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 alert, indicating that it's probably time to jump out of the plane before it flies off and you fail the mission before it's even started. Once you jump off the plane, you have to guide your parafoil down onto the gameplay field, and obviously you don't want to land in things like minefields, because that can also finish the mission before it's even started. Landing on walls and on stones and rocks and that kind of stuff is not particularly healthy either. It may not kill you, but it can still hurt you. So ideally you want to land on flat, unobstructed ground, or in a ditch of some description. Trench, I think they're called. Then the first thing you should do is to hit the pause key, the runs up key on the Commodore 64, which will open up the map, where it will give you a layout of the different enemy positions, like machine gun nests and bunkers and objectives and pickup zone and that kind of stuff. Men are not indicated on the map, but thankfully the game has a footsteps mechanic where you can actually hear footsteps. Obviously, positional audio was not exactly something that was easily available back then, and only computers that had stereo sound had any potential for projecting the sound, so you could identify whether it came from the left or from the right. So you only have an indication that someone is nearby with the footstep sound. But often that is enough to encourage you to seek cover and hide behind whatever you can hide behind. Once you have identified your objective and you are aware of the mission parameters, whether you have to be sneaky or can go full on bang bang, you have to sort of plan a route. The way the sneaky work is a bit awkward, perhaps, because every single enemy on the entire map can shoot at you. That's perfectly fine, as long as you do not shoot back. Your stealth requirement is based on any sounds you make. So as long as you sneak around enemies or avoid detection or run up to them and stab them, you are still considered to be stealthy. It's a bit, yeah, but at least it's an attempt of making some sort of stealth mechanic. And if you can bypass the incredibly silliness of it, it works out perfectly fine. The different missions you have can be something as simple as to steal a codebook or to capture an officer, but it can also be something like rescue hostages and blow up aircrafts that are placed on an airfield, like in this particular mission. And if you draw attention to yourself ahead of time in some of the missions, it can wreck your chances of completing the objective. POWs may be moved, hostages may be killed, mobile SAMs may be moved, and planes may take off. So Following the directions of the different missions is definitely recommended. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this game has 12 missions. And while the 12 different missions have very varied objectives and parameters for how you have to approach said missions, it is still just 12 missions, which may or may not be enough to satisfy certain gamers' needs. If you're going for the highest promotions and the highest medals, you will likely have to play the missions more than once. Unless, of course, you want to be buff and play on the highest difficulty level without prior knowledge of the different missions. It's likely going to be a very, very unpleasant and painful experience, though. As you increase the difficulty level, you will find that on the different missions, the enemies will suddenly have access to mini tanks and proximity turrets and things like that. And on top of that, the enemy soldiers, which usually just carry guns or rifles, whatever, they suddenly start carrying rocket launchers. And of course, if you are playing one of those missions where you can't make any noise yourself, trying to charge a guy firing rockets at you in order to stab him with your knife is not exactly a pleasant scenario. Microprose tried to bridge the gap between simulation and action game with this particular title, and while there was a certain amount of players who got it, understood Microprose's line of thinking behind this game, there was also a substantial group of players that didn't get it. Simulation buffs felt that the tactical gameplay was too simplistic to qualify as a simulation, and action gamers felt that the tactical gameplay slowed the action down to a crawl, uh, indicating that the game didn't qualify as an action game. But from a personal point of view, I enjoy progression-based games, and I do find this to be perfectly serviceable and perfectly playable, and it can be quite enjoyable to work out the puzzles that the missions effectively are in order to complete them. Whether you like that type of gameplay or not, that is, of course, an individual thing, but for all intents and purposes, I do think that Airborne Ranger, while not perfect, added some interesting ideas. Thanks for watching. Take care. See you next time. Bye bye for now.